Good afternoon. Welcome to the 6th Annual Interdisciplinary Research Conference. Kicking off our first presentation is Dr. Matthew Mitchell, speaking on the Health Performance Lab, Human Performance Labs, and what we've learned in 3 years. Hear ye him.
All right. Hey, good afternoon. Let me know volume-wise if we're okay. I can pick up the mic as well. Great to have you here. I know it is full, so thank you all, especially back row, for taking seats back there. Appreciate it. What I want to do, this is going to be a little bit of a different presentation. It's not going to focus so much on exact research we've done, methods, results, things like that. It's going to be more of kind of an overview of how we got to where we are and some of the things we've learned over the last 3 years. We're going to walk through some of the journey, how we started kind of from nothing to the facilities we have now, a lot of the research we're doing now. And so understand, and here's my asterisk to some of these things. You may not, some of the things I say you may not agree with, totally okay. I don't have the market cornered on right answers. Some of the things we do is probably more specific to us, but if there's one or two things that we do that you can take back to whatever area you're in, awesome. And so that's really my heart in this is how can we all do research better as faculty, and I know we have students here too. So students, you get kind of an inside view. This is going to be a little more directed towards faculty, but you'll kind of get a grasp of why do we do the things we do and why do we talk about things in classes more and such. So just understand that. Also, I have to give a huge thanks, and I could do this for the next hour, from the top down, from our president and provost who approved our department and our lab, to Dr. Sale. I don't know if Dr. Sale is here. I know he has other stuff he's doing today. Denise Bry-Cruz, who's head of our department, and pretty much said yes to anything, which is awesome. And then even others, who, I could go down a long list. Carolyn Stone, who's here, who athletics really supported us, and we've tried to support them as well. To athletic training, Vince, I know Vince wasn't here when we started, but now Corey, and again, I could go on, so I don't want to leave people out, so I'll stop there. In order to kind of understand how we got to where we are, I'm going to give you a little bit of my background, and I'm not a huge fan of talking about me, but I think grasping how I got here to PBA and how my experience kind of shapes how I view academics and view research might help a little bit, because it is a little bit different. So, graduated from Ohio Wesleyan University, go Battling Bishops. Yes. My degree was actually in physical education, but I also double majored. I started out as a pre-law major. Yeah, and took that to a political science major. When I went to grad school, got much more interested in more of the health, more clinical aspects. And so a master's degree, I went to Wake Forest, Demon Deacons. There's a theme there, Battling Bishops, Demon Deacons, I don't know. More in health sciences. Continued on to my PhD at University of Florida. And there was really, my work was in physiology. And I was taking classes in medical school, in veterinary medicine. That was much more my area. And in fact, a lot of my dissertation work was working with organ transplant patients. Very different than how I started, and a little bit different of what we do now. About a year into my PhD work, realized something really quickly. I hated it. And some of you, I know you've been there, you're like, and being nothing against UF, wonderful university, wonderful people, but the mentality, publish or perish is what we call it. The idea of you get grants or you get fired was not something I enjoyed. And really quickly, I just couldn't stand it and was about to quit. Fortunately, I actually got hired on to be an assistant soccer coach at UF. I'd played soccer and ran track in college, and so it was a great fit. And so with that, I stayed and decided, yeah, I should probably finish my PhD too. With that, I was also struggling with ministry. I'd come to Christ in college, and that had really slowly been really changing my life. And so in the middle of my PhD, I was really struggling with, God, does God want me to go into ministry? Do I want to do this? And so I actually took a summer off to be a youth intern at a church in Gainesville, and I won't tell you the name of the church. It was horrible. It was the most horrible experience. Our pastor got fired. Kids didn't like me. It didn't go well. But through that, I was like, yeah, this is what God's called me to do. And so put aside my PhD work. I did finish a year later. Went to seminary for 3 years. Yes, seminary. And was really interested in church planting. Worked in college ministry, then as a church planter. And that's important to understand because I was in that, and we worked for the Southern Baptist Convention for a couple of years, then kind of went from bigger church to bigger church, as often pastors do, till we got to here. I left that in 2012, and that's when I started here at PBA. And so my journey is academic, but not really. A lot of my background is ministry. A lot of the way I view people, the way I view work, has a very ministry mindset. And something that's important to understand, because when I view academics, when I view research, I really see it through that ministry mindset. And so it's some of the points I have here, and this is going to start to sound like a sermon. I realize that. I'm looking at the PowerPoints. I have 6 points. I almost put in blanks. I wanted to have a nice acronym. That got weird. But the idea that, for me, research has a different role for me and the way I'm wired. I'll get back to that. So how did we get to where we are? I started here in the fall of 2012. Back then, our department was physical education, and we had, I think, about 30 or 40 majors at that point. And very much our history had been to prepare teachers and physical educators to do well in that profession. The reality was our profession had really changed. We had moved not out of that, but more broadly into healthcare, into physical therapy, into occupational therapy, in the rehab settings. Those were more clinical areas I'd come from. And so realizing a lot of our students were going into areas that we probably weren't doing the best job of preparing them for. And so about a year of these conversations with Denise and Steve and just walking through how can we change this. And then at around the same time, we had to do a program review. If you're a PBA and you've done those, fun times, but was really a tool for us to say, you know what, if we're going to make some changes, let's do that. And so we took another year to figure out what those changes would be, how can we go forward. And from that came health and human performance. This idea of moving to a more broader area that has a research basis, has a clinical basis, and still has our preparing teachers to do excellent in those works. And so in this, a big part of this was this idea is that we have to have a lab. If you looked at other universities, if you looked at anyone who was doing anything, there had to be some environment where we could work with individuals, students, athletes in a clinical, hands-on setting. And we didn't have that. When I got here, we had a handful of heart rate monitors, some skin fold calipers. I think that was it. Like, I'm trying to remember a scale. We had a weight scale, which was very exciting. That was about it. And so getting to a proposal for this lab and what this lab could look like and trying to figure a way to fund it, which is obviously a big deal. And so we came up with this 3-year plan. And we're fortunate to get this approved. The Board of Trustees approved it, and beginning 2015, we were a full-fledged department. And with that, that's when our lab started. We still didn't have anything. We had a small little room. We had a subset of a classroom, 140 square feet to be exact, which is not a lot. It's a really nice bathroom, but not much more than that. Not much equipment, but we had a plan. And we had a plan where we wanted to go as far as acquiring and building, which we did some of that, equipment we could use. And you'll see pictures of that in a minute. We wanted to increase rigor. We realized that some of our students needed to have better academic backgrounds. And so we had some of our classes we removed. Some we added, some of them were harder. Some of you, if you're HHP students now, you're kind of one of the first ones through that. It was easier before, sorry. We added rigor. We added exercise science major. And the idea being that students who were going to go to grad school for physical therapy, occupational therapy, even PA school, things like that, we needed to better prepare. And I remember when we first did this, I remember saying this to Steve and Denise, being like, no student's going to want to do this. And no offense to biology or chemistry, because they have to take biology 1 and 2, chemistry 1, A&P 1 and 2. And I took those. Who wants to do that? And I remember saying, Denise, it's not a big deal. We're only going to have 5 students a year. Not a problem. Yeah, you'll see did not at all happen. We really wanted to focus on improving research. At that point, research was non-existent where we were. And realizing that had to become a key part of what we were doing. But not just for research's sake. Not just to publish, not just to say we did this, not to just have a poster on a wall that people could see, but to really, again, invest in students' lives, in their education. And so it's not just lecture. It's not just what we share. It's not just stories of what we've done. We're actually now starting to share stories of what they've done. And that was another key part of this. And again, didn't have a great plan of how that would happen. We just knew it did. Another big part of this, realizing that this is PBA. We're not going to be the larger universities of the world, nor do we necessarily want to be. And so because of that, there is always going to be some limit to what we could do individually. And the idea being that we had to make every effort to be interdisciplinary, to build relationships with anybody and everybody that we could. And so that first year, I set out to talk to anybody. I emailed Dr. Cardona, didn't know her. I'm like, hey, can I take a tour of your lab? Can I see what you do? And she was nice enough to show me around. Dr. Rowan was as well. Talked to Carolyn Stone, just, how can we support you? How can I build relationships? Maybe some of them will go somewhere, so maybe some of them won't. But realizing if we were really going to grow, if we're really going to have an impact with students, we had to get beyond us. And as you see, that became a really big part of what we do. And then the last was financial. And if you're faculty here, you get this. Money doesn't grow on trees, neither here at PBA nor anywhere else. And realizing if we really wanted to grow research in our lab that was sustainable, we had to find ways to make it sustainable on our own. We couldn't rely on university or anyone else. There had to be ways where we could do that. And we had some plans as far as how we could probably pull that off. So that was where we are. This was 2014, 2015. So now we get to present day. Some of you, if you're students here, you're like, I was in here this morning. You know all this. But if you're not, this is Green Complex 211. This is where our Human Performance Laboratory is. I could go through some of the equipment in here a little bit more in depth, but this is where we are today. A lot of neat stuff that we've been blessed with, from our bod pod, which is the thing that looks like a time capsule in the middle there, which is the thing everyone asks about. What is that? I'll talk more about that. An altitude chamber, which is up here, which we just got over Christmas, which is great. In fact, we used this in advanced clinical last week. We used that. We have a platform there that has a force plate built into it. We can measure ground reaction forces when people are walking. We use that right now with our cancer patients. I'll talk more about that as we go forward. And then some pictures on the side. And by the way, these students actually work in our lab. So Jamie Gosh, she's a senior. She's doing a diaphragm ultrasound on a student there. We're fortunate to have a diagnostic ultrasound that we use quite a bit. Tanner Young, I don't know if Tanner's in here, also works in our lab. This is our 3D biomechanical analysis unit. It has some sensors that we can put on an individual, and then it takes all that information and draws us a nice little skeleton of the actual person. We can put clothes on it too if you care. That one just happened to be the skeleton. It renders easier if it's a skeleton. So a lot of neat stuff we've been able to have. We have an EKG machine in there that we use quite a bit. Advanced clinical, we're in the middle of a 5-week section now of doing EKGs. We do that with our cancer patients as well. A couple other pictures. Some of our students, Emily Nickel on the side there. One of the things we do a lot is aerobic testing with athletes. I'd say over the last couple of years, we've had 3 or 4 teams come through, and we're measuring aerobic capacity. Some of you have been test subjects for those, and you love those tests because they're fun. They're not fun. So we have that unit. We have an O2 and CO2 analyzer that allows us to do that. Our EKG machine over there. And we do some CLIA-waived blood work, lactate, hemoglobin mass, which Grace, one of her QI grants, was looking at hemoglobin mass in female athletes. And so we've been able to do a lot moving forward. And please understand, I know some of us faculty-wise, we want a lot of things, right? And you may look at what we have, you're like, oh, you just want to make us feel bad. That's not the intent. It's more to just share, we didn't have anything, and we made a lot of efforts to acquire things as cheaply as we can, which I'll talk about in a minute. This isn't, again, to show off. It's more to share, wow, we've really been blessed. So on the academic side, a lot's changed. And I can go through some of these, but I think the graphs kind of speak for themselves. When I got here, we had about 40 majors. As of last year, we had 121, which is a lot. And we haven't hired any faculty since then, so you can imagine it's a little bit of a challenge. some of our FTE. But the part that, for us, that's been so impactful is on the research side. Is because we have made research such a key component of what we're trying to do. The last 2 years, we've gotten either faculty or students in our department 7 QI grants. We actually have 15 posters. One poster didn't get submitted this year, so 15, not 16. 5 presentations, 4 of them which are this year. And so tomorrow, if you're around tomorrow, Jessica Harris, Dan Farouk, Sean and Brian, who I think are in the back, they're doing some presentations on their work that they all got QI grants for. Awesome stuff what they're doing. And so we've been successful. And again, this is not to be like, see how awesome we are. That's not the intent. My intent is to tell you that through this, we learned a lot. Over the last 3 years, we learned things that worked, at least work for us. We made a ton of mistakes. We still make mistakes. And I'm going to share those as well. But to grasp that we are, even in the midst of right now, and now we're 2016, 17, we still have struggles. We still deal with financial. How are we going to budget things? How can we get new equipment? How can we get students plugged into research? Which I know if you're faculty, that's how do you do that? How do we do it well? Those are all questions we're still trying to figure out, even though it's really become a core of what we do. So I want to share with you, and this is where it may start to sound like a sermon, so don't say amen. That might be a little weird. Maybe not. I don't know. These are kind of 3 big ideas, and I will tell you these 3 sentences, these 3 big ideas drive almost everything, at least I do. And so at the end, if you ask questions, there's a good chance my answer is going to be one of these 3 sentences because they really are kind of the driving force of decisions we've made, why we do certain things, why we don't do certain things. So here we go. Big idea number 1. We don't get research done through students. We get students done through research. I think sometimes on the research side, we get really focused on, I want to publish this, I want to do this, for whatever reason, and sometimes wonderful reasons. My background, though, was ministry, and one of the things I realized in ministry is that it's about people, right? It's about people coming to Christ, not the size of the buildings, not attendance, and we may say that, but it's not. And so for me, this is probably the most important thing. So when I talk about research projects we have, when I talk about the emphasis we put on research, when I talk about the posters and why we make such a big deal about them, it's not because we want students just to do this stuff. We don't want to just get research done. We want to get students done through research. And this drives everything. This drives the way I advise students. And I'll share some of that. A lot of my advising meetings, always in the back of my mind is like, how can I get them plugged into research? How do I do that? How can they not just do research, but how can they grow from that? When we look at things we purchase in the lab, it always comes down to not, oh, what cool toy can we get? Now, how can we get the most use? How can the most students use it so they can get the most experience, so they can be best prepared to do blank? It's about getting students done through research. And so if you're a student here, that you may not think that. Some of you, if you've done research with me, you're like, I don't know, Dr. Mitchell. Sure sounds the other way. Ultimately, this is our focus. And this really drives a lot of the points, a lot of the tidbits, a lot of the nuggets that I'm going to share with you. A lot of them come from this idea. How can we get students done through research? Second, and this is going to sound a little weird maybe. What is your big, hairy, audacious goal? Call them BHAGs. What's like the crazy big, not, well, we want to be good. No, come on, we want to be awesome. What is that big, hairy, audacious goal? And so here's ours, and here's mine. I want us to have the best department in PBA and the best HHP department in the entire country. It's a little big. I get it. Is that going to happen? I don't know. But I think it can. And that's important because in whatever it is you're doing, we got to have those BHAGs, those big, hairy, audacious goals, the things that when you tell someone, they almost chuckle, like some of you did. If if it's athletics, whatever it is, we want to be the best. And so my goal here, and please understand this, I remember I was looking at this last night and thinking, they're going to think we want to take over. Like, we're going to take over every major, every department. That's not the goal. In fact, here's my hope. I would want you, whatever area you're in, I would want you to have the same goal. If you're athletic training, if you're in biology, if you're in chemistry, if you're in pharmacy, that idea that we can be the best at what we are at PBA. And it's easy to say, well, we don't have this, we don't have that, and I'm going to talk about some of those things. But as you look through the Bible, there are tons and tons of times where there are people who did not have blank. And God seems to do really amazing things. I got to think that in the whole scheme of what God's work has done, I think somewhere PBA can fit in there. And so can your it, whatever that is. And I'll share sort of how that looks for us and what those BHAGs are. And third, and this is something that is maybe more personal for me, is that everything rises and falls on leadership. You can have great ideas. You can have a great concept for a research study. You can have an awesome budget. You can have great people. You can have all of that. If there's one thing I've learned as we've gone through this process, if you don't have leadership, it's probably going to fail. And this is where, and I know Dr. Sal's not here, so tell him I said this. Having leaders who are willing to walk those miles with you. I remember when we first had some of these ideas, and it would have been really easy for Dr. Sale and Denise to say, come on, it's PBA, we don't have that much, this isn't UF. But that was never the response. When we wanted to have a separate lab, because there's tons of extra space at PBA. That's a joke. And so it would have been easy to say, well, no one's building a building, sorry. But instead, the answer was, let's see if we can find a way. And we did, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. But it also set the tone for what we do, realizing that when it comes to what students are doing, their quality is probably not defined by GPA. In fact, I was reading a study by the University of Michigan where they looked at undergraduate research. And one of the things they found, if you wanted to look at students to do successful undergraduate research, don't look at GPA. No correlation. Right? Now, you want to look at what's the big factor? Faculty who care, faculty who ask, faculty who lead. That's where you see undergraduates doing research. It's not necessarily the smartest. And that's important because for us, realizing it's easy to say we may not have something we want, we can't do things, don't have the knowledge base, that's not our background, that's not my experience. We can say that, and we might be right. But ultimately, when it comes to whether we can do something, accomplish something, it probably falls on leadership. I'm going to say kudos to Steve here for a second. So if you get red, sorry. Steve Sylvester, Dr. Sylvester, he oversees our cancer fatigue program. And probably from day one when we started the lab, we knew it was the one thing that we were doing and doing pretty well. And so for us, we knew all our research is probably going to go in that direction. I never worked with cancer patients. I knew nothing. And so for me, there was this challenge of, well, I could easily say, Steve, that's not my area. Good luck. Let me know how it goes. But leadership saying, okay, well, he's leading a program. The effort, the time, the passion he has into it is producing results. We're seeing not just good data, but people learning about PBA, people wanting to come back. We now have wait lists of people to get in. Really awesome leadership. I was like, well, I got to go with that. And I'll figure a way to learn. And then I would read books and articles on cancer fatigue, and we're still learning. Understanding that leadership ultimately is probably the answer. And by the way, this is not just an academic thing, by the way. This is a life thing. Okay. So these big three ideas, and this is going to drive every one of these little nuggets I have. And again, you may like some of these, you may agree, you may disagree. Totally okay. Let me walk through some of the things we've learned. So here's number one. You have to set the bar high. Whatever the it is you do. And so for us, it's understanding that because we have undergraduate students, we don't have graduate students in our program yet. Our BHAG, our goal, our high bar is, you know what? We're going to do graduate level research with undergraduate students. I don't know how. No offense. I don't know if they're smart enough. I don't know if I'm smart enough. I'm being honest. But that's our BHAG. We can do that. Well, fast forward, I think in 2017, and you can look at some of the presentations our students are doing from looking at alleles of proteins in relations to depression and exercise, when looking at hemoglobin mass in female athletes, looking at ultrasound imaging of the diaphragm muscle at altitude. We're doing graduate level research. Now, some of our undergrads don't know that, and some of you don't know that you are. Honestly, probably better than at some places. And that's awesome. And that's an example of, we can easily say we don't have certain things, but when we set that bar high enough, people have a way of meeting that bar. And that's, if there's one thing I've really learned in this area, is that set that bar high. And so in our program, and some of our undergrads are just seeing this, we've built this research concept into classes, into what we do. For example, if you're a freshman, if you take our foundations classes, we in foundations talk about research projects. We ask you to volunteer as a subject, as a freshman. We hope you volunteer in the lab, and we ask. Steve and Denise and I, we actually probably every month or so, I ask, hey, so who are new freshmen that we can plug in? Do you know them at all? We're always making that effort. Is there a way we can begin to set that bar high? In some of our classes that I teach, I've moved away from papers to more lit reviews. Lit reviews involve research. How can we get students to begin to look at research articles early, not when they do research? I mean, the last thing I want is when a student's doing a research project, their project halfway through, they're like, so what's the methods? I don't want that. And so we've built into our classes literature reviews, writing those. And I know some of you, you've had me, you don't like that, sorry. But it's part of the process to then, when you're doing some of those research projects, a lit review is like, I've done that before, that's easy. That's the point. And so then you're beginning the process of looking at what other people have written. And this is the cool part, and this is where I gotta share the story. I had a student the last couple days in one of my classes, Advanced Clinical Physiology, and we, all the students in there have to do a literature review. And so he's doing it on this area that's really involved, and he emails me, he's like, Dr. Mitchell, hey, so I found another lit review on this. Can I use that? And I'm like, sure, awesome. You can't copy it, but use that as a good baseline. So then he emails me back 2 hours. He's like, okay, Dr. Mitchell, thanks. Got another question. So I found this study, and I read their methods and everything, and I don't think their methods are very good, and I think their statistics they use aren't good. Can I talk about that in my paper? And of course, I'm sitting there like, wow, that's awesome. Because part of the process is, you get to a point where that bar is so high, you start to realize just because you have a PhD doesn't mean you do this well. Yeah, and you begin to be able to critique and say, yeah, those methods are good, but those aren't. And that was one of those like aha moments. Awesome. Being able to build these in, and that's been a big for us, so that by the time we have students doing research now, that process is ingrained. In our exercise physiology class, students have to do a group research project where they begin some of the initial processes of that. And again, however we can build research, again, it's not about research, it's about getting students done through research. And so part of this is understanding that anything's possible. And I'm going to tell you, this is where things get hard. Because anything is possible, that doesn't mean everything is probable. And I'll have students come to me who have awesome, well-thought ideas that I sit there, and the outside of me is like, that is awesome. The inside of me is like, I have no idea how we can do that. Or I have no idea what you're talking about. That's one of the negatives here. Another example of this is setting also very clear expectations. Great example. When we first started our lab, one of the things we realized we really needed to have was students working in the lab. It couldn't just be me. If you're faculty here, we do things like teach and advise, and that takes time. And so I just didn't have the time. So we had a student, Alejandro Castaneda, who graduated last year, And about 3-4 weeks in the semester, due to some other issues, he came to me, he's like, hey, I know you have this lab. I know it's not real big. Can I work in here and do stuff? And I had Alejandro in one class. I didn't know him really well. I'm like, sure, see how it goes. And we didn't have anything then. We had a treadmill. I think we'd just gotten a metabolic cart that we were still figuring out how to use. But I was like, all right, awesome. And so I'm like, hey, here's the deal. Alejandro, I just want you to learn. That was rule number 1, learn. If you don't accomplish anything, if you break everything, just learn and we'll accomplish something. So the first weekend we get started, we had one piece of equipment we had when we started was this TriFit machine that allows us to do physical health assessments. We hadn't used it for a while. It was sitting in a corner, had some dust on it. And I go to Alejandro, hey, Alejandro, here's the deal. I have this machine here. I don't have time to figure it out. Can you fix it? Just figure it out. Figure out how it works. In my mind thinking, very least, it'll give him something to do. That sounds so horrible, but he'll do something. And he's like, Dr. Mitchell, yes, no problem. And so I didn't think about it for a weekend. Next week comes by, and I come into a Thursday afternoon, and he's in the lab, and he's got the computer on, and it's working, and he's got things on the screen. It was so cool. And I'm like, Alejandro, how'd you do it? And he's like, well, and this is the best part. He's like, well, I didn't know what to do, so I called the company, and then they told me how to download the owner's manual, and it's 80 pages, so I took it home, and I read it over the weekend. And then I figured out how to turn it on, and I calibrated everything, and it looks like it's working. And he's dead serious, duh, I knew this is what you asked me to do. And in my mind, I'm like, I didn't expect you to do it. If we set the bar high, people have an amazing way of reaching that bar. And so now I do this all the time. And this is horrible because I'll ask students, Jamie, I got to pick on Jamie. We have an ultrasound machine, and I need someone who could do ultrasound. And Jamie was who ended up being. So I'm like, Jamie, hey, we want to do this research study. We want to measure the movement of diaphragm with ultrasound. Can you learn how to do that? Because that's easy. And her answer was, yeah, I'll give it a try. And she won by pure recruitment. Set the bar high, and she ends up being part of a QI grant we get, is some research we did. In fact, got to a point where there was some testing Sean and Brian were doing for that study. I was there, and I couldn't get the diaphragm right. And Sean's exact words, and Sean, I know you're back there. He's like, we'll have Jamie do it. We know she can do it. I'm like, thank you for ruining my pride. But again, that's the point. How can we prepare students? It's not about getting research done through students, it's about getting students done through research. Painful fact, this takes work. It takes time. I'd love to tell you, Jamie just learned how to do that on her own. We had to practice, get people involved. I had to be there. It takes a lot of time. And that's a difficult part of what we're doing. The second part, recruit. If you're a student, you probably don't know this. A lot of what we do in the background is recruiting. When I meet with advisees, and I encourage you, if you don't meet with them one-on-one, I don't know what the policy is with that. You should. I mean, every advisee meeting, my thought is, how can I get the student plugged into research or something? Sometimes it doesn't go anywhere. Sometimes it does. Great example of this. I have a student this semester, Anna Pass. We're meeting for an advisee meeting, and I knew she had to do student research, and I was like, hey, I know it's coming up. You have any ideas? She's like, I don't know. I really like nutrition. I'm like, cool, I like nutrition too. I don't do that stuff, but awesome. And I'm like, what exactly? She's like, well, I'm really interested in nutritional issues. And she took me for nutrition. She's like, I love the things we talked about there, like anemia and stuff like that. We're doing research with anemia. I have this student, Grace Patterson, and I start talking about Grace and her grant. I'm like, we could do something with that. And she's like, yeah, we could look at iron. And in my mind, I'm like, I don't know how, but I'm like, yeah, we could do that. A week later, the QI grant deadline is 5 o'clock. She's in my lab at 2. You don't want to hear this, Marcus. She's in my lab. We're quickly, and it's all her. She's sitting on her laptop right next to me, asking me, what do I do for question 8? I'm like, I don't know. Do the best you can. We submitted it by 4:53, I think was the deadline we got to. But it was all her taking this idea, and because someone said, yes, you can do it, having the courage to say, yeah, I'll give it a try. Part of this is planting seeds. Part of this is telling stories. One of the things I try to do in classes is I'm always trying to tell a story about research we're doing. Any research. If it's nutrition, and we talk about iron, I talk about anemia. If it's If it's physiology, which I teach, and we're talking about the heart, I'll tell stories about how the mitral valve and ultrasound, which we have in the lab. You should see it. It's really cool. I start talking about that. However we can incorporate those stories so it becomes part of the language of, it's not just a thing we do, it's the thing we do. And again, it's not about the research. It's about getting students prepared. The tough part about this is you have to want to do it. You have to want to put in that effort. You have to want, every time admissions comes and says, can you meet with the student? You have to want to do it. And I sign up for those like every time. I mean, give me a high school student and their family, especially dads, because they see stuff in the lab, no offense, females, and they're like, and they want to know, what's this? And suddenly it becomes recruiting. Well, let me tell you, I'll give you a tour, and suddenly 20 minutes later, they've learned all about what we're doing, how students can be prepared. It's awesome. So recruiting, making a big effort in that. With that, another thing we do is practice what we call open environments. This actually, for me, comes from ministry, where when I was a church planner, we had nothing. When you are planning church, there's no building, there's no people, there's no money, it's you. And so you would go door to door. That's what I did, talking to people and saying, hey, do you know Jesus? That was me. Sorry. And so when you're recruiting in that kind of environment, it's all about relationships. There's no worship guide. There's no bulletin to put on the church website so people will sign up. There's none of that. You ask or you have nothing. And so part of that is having what we call open environments. Open ways where people can find ways to get plugged in. So here's some ways we do this. And this is maybe a little different than what some of you would think. The doors of our lab, we leave open all day. 7 a.m., about when I get there, to whenever. They're open all the time. You can walk in. Now I know you're thinking, people steal stuff. Yeah, probably. But that's not the point. We have this open environment. We want students to come in, ask questions, do things, feel like, hey, this isn't my place, this is yours. This is your environment. My office is in the lab. I go to my office maybe once a week. In fact, it's so bad. I should tell the story. It's so bad. They had moved our offices to Okeechobee in the fall. I never unpacked my boxes. I actually had a work study student do it last week. That's how bad it was. I'm just never in there. Office hours in the lab. Meetings, we have in the lab. If I'm going to meet with prospective students, it's in the lab. Because that's the center of what we're doing. And that's where students hang out. And that becomes a place where students hang out. I cannot begin to tell you the things I hear, both good and bad, stories. And because students tend to hang out. And you get 3, you get 4, suddenly it's a study session. And on any given day, and literally this week, yesterday, Monday, we had an exercise physiology group doing a research project. We had cancer fatigue testing on one corner. We had 3 students studying kinesiology. And that engages conversation, and more so than we probably would if we didn't have the lab open. This idea of it's an open space. And it may be a little different, and there are negatives to this. Privacy is at a minimum. Everybody hears conversations. If you want private time, go home. The other negative with this, I do a lot of work at home. I'd love to tell you that grading papers happens in the lab. It doesn't. It usually happens at home. And that's a negative. With this, another key thing we've learned, and this is geared towards you, not towards me, not towards you, don't whine about not having blank. Because there are tons of things we don't have. Or don't be upset about, well, so-and-so has this, it'd be great if we did. One of the things we realized when we started is, you know what? There are a lot of things we wish we could do, wish we could have, projects which we wish we could do. Well, what do we have? And so for us, it was one of these Exodus 4 moments. If you're familiar with Exodus, God shows up to Moses, tells him, hey, I have these great plans for you. Moses is like, me? I can't talk. I stutter. What? No way. And what does God say in Exodus 4? He says, what's in your hand? And Moses is like, well, it's a staff. And God says, throw it on the ground. In other words, let it go. He does, and if you know the passage, it turns into a snake, and God does amazing things. I think there's a part there of what's in your hands. What do you have? So for us, the first thing we realized, well, we have athletes. Athletics is right downstairs. That's probably a good place to start. And so I made every effort to meet with coaches, ask Carolyn Brown, can I meet with every coach, however we can help them, serve them, realizing our equipment may get broken, it may get messed up. I don't know if it's a good idea, but it's what we have. Well, fast forward 2 years later, we still do a lot with athletes, but a lot of our research is not. It's more with a clinical application. We have grants with the pharmacy school with Dr. Matroka, which is another cool story how that happened. So we took what was in our hands, let God take that and then grow it into what it is now. So with that, obviously there's the financial part, and there's grants. I can get a little bit into that, but the QI grant system is huge. Use that. It is a huge focus for me in communicating to students. How can we get grants to do what you want to do? Here's the other part. Sometimes you just can't afford stuff. There are things in our lab I built. Just being honest. When we have our force plate, the force plate costs a little bit amount of money. So the company we got it from, they're like, hey, you really need to put the force plate into the floor. No one was going to allow that to happen. And so with that, they decide, well, you really need to have it on a platform. Okay, how much is the platform going to cost? $3,000. Yeah, I can't do that. So I'm like, well, I think we can build that. So for $89 a piece and a few Home Depot runs, we built a wood platform. Is it good? It's not great. I built it, come on. But it's not $3,000. Our altitude chamber, we bought in pieces. Off eBay, we got a piece, and I can tell you all the stories about that. Ways we can get things inexpensively. Is it perfect? No. Is it the best way to do it? Of course it's not. But does it give us opportunities to now where we have equipment, have means to where students can have experiences, learn things they would have never learned before? Yeah. And again, it's about getting students done through research. The bad part of this, I spend probably about a quarter of my time worrying about funding and grants and stuff, which is a lot. It's a constant thing for us. With this as students, and this has been a big part for us, finding a way, how can we involve students? So one of the things we do is we use work study, and this is a little different for us. We have a few students in our lab who do work study, but I don't have them do a lot of the normal work study things. I would never have a student go run an errand or make a copy. If I have a choice between will a student learn from making copies or learn from looking at some of the data in our cancer research and doing some analysis, which one am I going to choose? Not the copies. And so I do that. I do the copies. They do the things like testing subjects. They do the things like helping with other classes and group research projects. They do the things like working with some of our cancer patients, looking at data, reading stuff. They do some of that higher level stuff because we raise the bar really high. And we find ways to train students. Does it always work? No. Does every student love doing it? Probably not. But it's a great opportunity. Using Workship, which we do in our cancer program, where we now offer that as an opportunity where students can volunteer. Great way to couple research with what we're doing. A couple more with this, and these two I want to finish with, is making opportunities. Find ways to see the opportunities around you. For us, it started with cancer fatigue, and this is one of those, this is how things happen. We're doing research with cancer fatigue, doing neat stuff, the program is growing. Well, then from that, I have a meeting with Dr. Matroka, and we meet kind of randomly. He's on the second floor one day, sees our lab, he's like, hey, what is this? And we have a conversation, we meet. A few months later, we are working on grants. And so now that opens a door to now look at some more in-depth biochemical kind of things with these patients. All right, well, now we're working with athletes. That opens doors of things we can do with athletes. Well, now we're partnering with the pharmacy school. Now we have students doing some of these, getting experience and things that they never would have gotten. Well, then we get connected to things like the Paley Institute, which is part of St. Mary's Hospital. They looking for some students who have some experience, have some background. We now have students who are doing these research things, so we send 2 students to intern there. It goes awesome, right? That then snowballs into other things. Working with donors. We're right now in the process of trying to get donors to give us some funding, hopefully. This Vicky Pugh, Vicky emails me a few weeks ago. It's like, hey, I got a call from Palm Healthcare. They're working on this fellowship grant. Would you be interested? I'm like, yeah. When's the deadline? In a week. Yeah. It's a spring break. While you were at the beach, I was in my apartment writing a fellowship and a grant. because it was an awesome opportunity that landed in our lap. And if it goes through, it's going to be awesome for what we're doing. The tough thing about this is it's really easy to get spread thin. And I do have this mindset. I try to not say no. And I know for some of us that's a fault. But if I can find a way to say yes. And so I kind of have this mindset. I don't say no to anything. So I try not to. If I can find a way to say yes. Even if it's not a yes from me, but a yes from someone else. And so part of that, we're driven by some of our core values. And we have some things that we always try to say yes to. When it comes to cancer fatigue, we always try to say yes to that. If anything we do in athletes, it's almost always a yes. If there's a way we can engage the community, which this fellowship will allow us to do, we say yes. If there's a way we can engage students in a better learning experience, we say yes. And so because of that, our research tends to be really broad. I would love to tell you that for myself or Steve or Denise, we have these very niche areas. We don't. Right now, we have like 6 different things going on, which are totally not related at all. And that's hard. It's great for students because these are students who, these are things they want to learn. These are areas that they've come to us interested in. And that's awesome. There's passion that comes with that. The negative being, they're not areas I'm interested in. And so there will be times I'll have a student come to me, and we've had a few this year who have this great idea. And in the back of my mind is like, I should learn what that is. And I go home and I do research, much like students do. The last is you have to embrace failure. Things break all the time. Students make mistakes. Sometimes. Faculty make mistakes, more than sometimes. We mess things up. We do things wrong. We handle people incorrectly, or we don't do as well as we can. Happens all the time. And it's one thing to say, well, gosh, we can't do that again. We probably need to be more careful. Sure. But what if we embrace failure? What if we look at that as an opportunity? What if we look at that? I've had situations where a calibration tank breaks, and we're out a month of being able to do testing, which is a huge deal. But instead, we're like, hey, let's learn from that. Not let's stop doing it. How can we move forward in it? And so part of that, we budget for that. We expect that. But embrace failure. Embrace that opportunity. If something gets stolen, it happens. Maybe God will use that. Awesome. But see that as an opportunity, not as an obstacle. And so here's what I want to leave you with. Be excellent. Whatever the it is you do, be awesome at it. If there's obstacles, if in the research or the work you're doing, there's 3-4 obstacles, there's probably a good reason they're there. And so embrace that. And whatever it is you do, and DFTBA, don't forget to be awesome. Not John Green, that's more his. But whatever the it is you do, athletics or biology or chemistry or pharmacy, whatever the it is, man, be awesome at it. Have the BHAG of being the most awesome at that around. You will reach it. Appreciate it. Thank you.